Okay, so this is my very first test of the TWOPAN T03 external SSD, and I'm testing this with my iPhone 17 Pro Max. Now, I think these SSDs are primarily designed for the iPhone series that use USB-C. However, you can absolutely use these SSDs with anything that's USB-C compatible, so it's not just limited to use with the iPhones. Now, for this particular test, what I've done is to jump in right at the deep end, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. But what I'm doing here is to record the highest resolution with the highest frame rate and the highest codec variation, so I'm proper stressing out the SSD. Now, I will kind of explain a bit more about that in a second, as I've just said. Now, also what I'm doing is to use an external microphone, and this is a DJI Mic Mini, and this is connected through the new DJI little tiny USB-C receiver, which is connected into the USB-C pass-through port of the TWOPAN T03. So what I'm going to do now with this camera here is just to show you the setup as best as I can. So as we'll should be able to see there is the TWOPAN T03 connected to the iPhone, and that is connected via this little angle adapter that comes with the T03. And then as we can see there is the new or recently released DJI receiver. Now, this receiver is compatible with the likes of the Mic 3 and the Mic Mini, and I believe maybe one other of the DJI mics. But as we can see, because that is super tiny, it just connects directly through to the USB-C pass-through port on the T03, which makes it absolutely ridiculously small. I mean, just bear in mind that's 2 terabytes worth of high bandwidth SSD and a receiver for 2 microphones there. I've obviously only got the 1 mic on at the moment, but you can put the 2 mics in. Then if we have a little look here, that's the angled USB-C adapter or extender that comes with the T03. Now, just something quick here, I don't know if we're going to see this, but the T03 doesn't sit flush with the iPhone when it's using this adapter. However, I don't have any concerns about that, because the weight of the actual T03, and even with the DJI receiver there, it's absolutely nothing in weight, so it's not putting any stress whatsoever on that connection there. Now, you do obviously have cables that come with the T03, so you could do the exact same thing but using a cable, and then the T03 connects magnetically to the back of the iPhone using the MagSafe magnet system. However, for me personally, that's just definitely the smallest and most convenient way of using it. Now, if I just come round to here, as we should be able to see, there is the Blackmagic Camera App, and we should be able to see there as well. There's the VU levels there for the microphone, and there's the interface for the Blackmagic Camera App. And as you can see there, I am recording in open gate. So what I'm going to do now is just to sit down and to explain some more of what's going on here as far as the settings are concerned. Okay, so I'm just going to explain a little bit here about some of the settings that I'm using, and also to explain why this is properly stressing out the SSD. So as we could see with the Blackmagic Camera App there, I am actually recording in open gate. So this is open gate, 60 FPS, and I'm also using ProRes RAW HQ. Now, those particular combination of settings basically means that I am recording at the highest possible bit rate. Now, another thing that I've done here is to set the Blackmagic Camera App to stop recording if it detects any dropped frames. So basically what that means is that if the SSD is not capable of recording at this highest possible bitrate, which the iPhone 17 Pro Max can do, the recording's going to stop. So I will definitely know for sure as to whether or not the SSD is capable of sustaining the necessary data rates. However, I've already done some testing with the SSD on my MacBook Pro, and I've run some basic speed tests, and the sustained write speed that I'm getting on my MacBook Pro is way above anything that any of the codec options can do on the iPhone. So I've got no doubt that this SSD is going to record probably until it fills up without dropping any frames on an iPhone 17 Pro Max, using its highest possible bit rates with the combination of resolution and frame rate and such. Now, you can obviously record 120 FPS in OpenGate, which is something that I've not done before. However, when you do that, apparently we get a sensor crop on the go, so we're not actually recording the full size of the sensor, which is what we're doing right now in OpenGate. So like I say, you can do 120 FPS, but it will reduce the resolution. Now, I've got no doubt that it's going to record the 120 FPS as well. That's not going to be an issue. Like I say, I've already determined that the speed of the SSD on my MacBook is way higher than any of the codec and frame rate and resolution combinations that you can get on the iPhone 17 Pro Max. But nonetheless, right now, this is the absolute highest quality, because this is not a cropped variation of OpenGate, which is what we would get with 120 FPS. Now, I'm assuming that I'm actually right with all that. It's just that I did do a little bit of a research, because I don't shoot at 120 OpenGate, and that's what Google was telling me. So if that's wrong, blame Google AI. Anyway, so like I say, I'm pushing the SSD as much as possible. Now, as far as the microphone is concerned, I'm using obviously just the one Mic Mini, but you can connect two of them. And what I'm doing here is I've already set the levels. Oh, in fact, this will be the first time that I've heard this combination as well. This is the first time that I'm testing this DJI receiver as well. So I've never tested this before. So basically how I've set this up is I've reduced the input gain to the lowest possible, because I have a loud voice. I've done that with inside of the DJI app. And then what I've done as well, I've switched on safety track just in case. So basically I think it's a minus 10 dB mirror of, like, you know, one side of the stereo image to the other. I don't think it records dual mono. I think it's just straight stereo. However, in practice, there's no difference between dual mono and stereo as long as you correct for the actual panning information on playback. Anyway, so that's basically the setup as far as the DJI app is concerned, with the receiver and the microphone. And then on top of that as well, what I've done, just for a little bit more of good measure, I've reduced the record level down slightly. So what I'm recording here right now is peaking at its maximum at minus 10 dB. So basically I'm just assured that I will not be clipping the recording itself. If I'm clipping anywhere else, it's definitely not the record level itself. Okay, so I've done a lot of talking here, and one of the reasons for that, or two of the reasons, is because I want to make sure that I can do, like, you know, relatively long takes with this, like, highest, like, bitrate option for the iPhone using the T03. But also what I'm going to do is to work out what the bitrate has been for this particular recording. So what I'm going to do right now is flash up on the screen the bit rate. Now, what I've done here is to take the entire length of this single clip, because it is just one clip that I'm recording. So although when I got up before and had a look at the phone, and I then come and sat back down, and that was probably a jump cut, it's all done from one long clip. So what I will have done here is to have just calculated the bit rate by measuring, by knowing the size of the input file, and then just dividing it by the amount of seconds that the take is, and that then gives us our completely accurate bit rate. Because of course what we have to remember here is that all these variants of ProRes are essentially VBR codecs, so basically they're variable bit rate. However, saying that, the lowest that these VBR rates are is actually quite high. Now, another quick thing that I did do, but I didn't actually play it back or anything, I just test for drop frames, is that I had the TWOPAN T03 with the iPhone indoors, and I was just shaking it about for a couple of minutes while I was recording with the exact same record settings. And the reason for that is because when you use a VBR codec, what they are designed to do is to ramp up the bit rate when there's like a requirement for it, and that requirement would normally be loads of fast motion or loads of things changing in the frame. So shaking your phone around like a complete fool basically means that every single frame has got motion in it, so that is definitely going to push the bitrate as high as possible. So what happened after about 2 minutes of doing that, because my arm started getting tired, yeah, there was no drop frames or anything. And right now I don't know how long I've been talking for and recording for, obviously, but with this particular take here, the bit rate won't be as high as what it would have been while I was shaking the phone around like a lunatic, but nonetheless it's definitely going to be a fairly high bit rate. Anyway, I don't think there's much else for me to talk about here, and yet this preliminary test has been very long, and hopefully if I do play this out to anybody, there's been enough information in here for you to determine exactly what's going on here, and probably more so just to impress upon anyone that I might show the video to exactly how cool this SSD is. Oh, last thing to mention here as well, yeah, the T03 is actually a combination of TWOPAN's previous two tiny SSDs. That's the T01 and the T02. The T01 looks very similar to the T03. However, what this one does here, the T03, is build upon what the T01 was doing. However, what it has also done is to take in the fingerprint scanner from the T02. So basically the T03 is like a T01 but better, and it's also got a fingerprint scanner on it as well. So basically the best of both worlds between the T01 and the T02. Anyway, I'm gonna have to get off because I need to go to one of the fields in the park here to do a range test. I'm gonna do a range test for this DJI receiver, because with this being so small, and I know the size shouldn't really come into play because we're dealing with super high frequencies, so the antennas are going to be tiny anyways, but you know, this receiver is way smaller than the standard receiver that comes with the Mic Minis. So I just want to do a range test with this in a second, and also what I'm going to do is a range test with and without the SSD as well, just to see if there's any kind of impact to do with maybe voltage or something when the receiver's plugged into the SSD when I start doing my range testing. Anyway, as far as this particular test is concerned, that'll do it for this test. And like I say, it's been very long and me talking constantly about stuff because I am basically stressing the SSD to make sure that it can do relatively long takes. Oh, and on that point as well, I don't know how long this has been so far, but this is likely to be a pretty long take for my own particular uses. So I can see immediately that nothing's screwed up. The SSD is recording properly for the entirety of this take. So as far as I'm concerned, this SSD is not going to have any problems as far as the amount of length of video it is that you are going to record on it. Anyway, that will do for that.